Joining me now is Pete Buttigieg, who is with us tonight in his personal capacity as a surrogate for the Harris campaign. Pete Buttigieg, thank you for being here. I want to ask you, as a military veteran, to just give me your take on the muted response to not one but two generals saying that the president they worked for, the former president, is indeed a fascist and a Hitler fan.
Well, it's an extraordinarily big deal. First of all, it's a big deal for somebody with that kind of military background to weigh in on politics at all. That's not something that someone like General Kelly or General Milley would do lightly. But the other thing that's amazing is these aren't just, faceless people from the national security establishment. John Kelly was also a political appointee of Donald Trump, the top political appointee of Donald Trump, the leader of his White House, his chief of staff. And I can't think of another time in history when an American president had his own chief of staff turn around and say that this person is dangerous and has no business near the Oval Office. Just as I can't think of another time when this many Republicans have said, you got to vote Democrat this time, even though I disagree. I think a lot of Republicans have found that for them, this is not a policy election. They might agree with us and with, or they might disagree with the vice president and with us on any number of social or economic issues, but they believe that something even more important is at stake, and that's what they're saying. The challenge, of course, for the campaign will be to remind everybody about how profoundly important that is without getting sucked away from the other important issues here. The fact that it is Kamala Harris and only Kamala Harris who has a plan to make sure that prices are more affordable in this country, that more housing is built in this country, that the right to choose can be restored in this country, that the child tax credit is expanded in this country, and all of the things that affect people's everyday lives here in Michigan, where I'm in Detroit as we speak, and around the country as they're deciding both how to vote and, for some, deciding whether to vote.
I'm going to let everyone know that you're seeing on the other side of the screen, I do believe that is Senator Raphael Warnock, who stepped up to the podium. That is outside of Atlanta. This is this big rally. We're waiting to see Barack Obama himself, who will walk out onto that stage and take the stage eventually. We've already seen Bruce Springsteen, Spike Lee. It's a star-studded event. But I want to come back to you, Pete Buttigieg, because, you were a mayor in this great state of Indiana, not exactly a liberal state, but a state that Barack Obama managed to carry in 2008 against all odds. You've been a mayor, which is as close to the people as you can get in politics, and you spend a fair amount of time on Fox News. So you go into Earth 2 and talk to them. So you're very good at that communication. What does the case look like made to, let's say, somebody from South Bend, Indiana, as to why they, as a core Republican, somebody who doesn't particularly like Democrats, should reject Donald Trump?
Well, I think there's two pieces to it. One is to I mean, I think really there's three sets of folks, overlapping sets of folks we're talking to. First, the American majority who do agree with us on policy, who are against tax cuts for the rich, and who are upset that Donald Trump took away the right to choose from the national right to choose that every American woman had before he became president, and that is now gone. So that's Democrats. But that's not only Democrats. It's independents and some Republicans who will be with us on the policy. That's part one. Part two is those who don't agree on policy, but the message to them is, look, this is about so much more than policy, and that's why you've got a coalition that has everybody from AOC to Dick Cheney in it. That's why you have Donald Trump's own chief of staff. Again, not just some random appointee, but his own chief of staff. By the way, also his own vice president, his own secretary of defense. You go on down the list, not supporting him this time around. And then there's a third set of folks, and again, these sets overlap, but I think this is a group we need to speak to as well, who don't like getting up in the morning and thinking about politics all the time. They might care about policies and care about issues, but the biggest thing they want is just not to have politics punching them in the face every time they look at the news. And I think the appeal there is, hey, you have a chance. There's a lot of people I know in South Bend like this and around here in Michigan, and my neighbors now in Traverse City who are like, look, I just want to not have to worry about politics every single day. Can we have less of the drama, less of the chaos, less of this craziness? And I actually think that's a very important appeal to be making, especially to people who don't always vote but are deciding whether to vote this time around. It's actually a vote to have politics be in your face a little less.
That is an excellent point, and an exhaustion election is what I felt 2020 was, which is why it seemed pretty clear that President Biden would beat Donald Trump, because there was that sense of exhaustion with it. But in the interim, what you've had is a kind of amnesia about the Trump era, and people misremembering it as the greatest economic era of their lives, even though that was Obama's economy. And when they watch Fox, for instance, other than seeing you tell the truth on Fox, Trump is edited heavily on Fox. They don't really see what Trump is actually like. They don't see his feeble mind at work. They don't see him slurring and not knowing where he is physically in the world and in what state or city he's in. And they also might not really think about fascism, right? Or the concept of democracy. These are things that are not kitchen table issues. Do those issues resonate, and can those issues be made to resonate with your average, like you said, exhausted voter who doesn't care about politics, but who, if you explain fascism to them, might care?
Well, I think the important thing is that all of those arguments point in the same direction. So whether you're concerned about the trajectory of U.S. democracy and these questions of democracy versus authoritarianism, obviously that points you toward voting for Kamala Harris, which is why even many conservative Republicans are saying you got to be for Harris. But also, I think those kitchen tables, right, they travel, those kitchen table issues travel in the same direction. There are a lot of people at home who, if they're in a certain information environment, might not be hearing about some really important basic results that are important to them on economics or public safety. A lot of people haven't actually heard about the way that murders went up under Donald Trump and the way that violent crime has gone down after he got beat and left office. I recently saw a statistic that said that something like half of Americans believe that unemployment is at a 50-year high, when, of course, the truth is it's near a 50-year low. And rather than judge those folks, I think the most important thing is to recognize that if I got my information from the sources and only the sources that they get their information from, then how would I know any different? That's why we got to cut across those information bubbles. One way to do it is to go on Fox, but really it's neighbor-to-neighbor conversations. I was just with a group from the AFL-CIO yesterday going out to talk to their fellow union members. It's talking to family members, which can be uncomfortable. I get it. It's one of the hardest things to do in politics is to talk to somebody you already know about why you're urging them to vote and why it matters so much to you. But that is the thing that will cut across and make a difference here.
Spoken by somebody who knows how to do it. Pete Buttigieg, thank you very much. Much appreciated.